Marine Corps events to give first recognition to any Medal of Honor recipients in attendance. It is even more appropriate this year, since Major General Jim Livingston was inducted into the Gyrene Gallery of Greats last year and could not be present for the award. Jim, would you please stand to be recognized? In addition, we have two other inductees into the Gyrene Galleries of Greats present, Mr. Carlton Tronvol and Mr. Richard Monroe.
They say that the Marine Corps training is the best executive and leadership training in the world, and it's certainly been beneficial to me in my career. And that's why we do what we do with these scholarships. We give a full ride to former Marines and other veterans of other branches. And it's the only category that we do that to. We don't do it for 4-point students. We don't do it for star athletes. We only do it for former Marines, because what we want to do is combine that tremendous leadership training that you get in the Marine Corps with the outstanding liberal arts education, spiritual and academic education.
I've been a little reluctant to accept honors ever since 1990, when I was in the Czech Republic right after the fall of the Communist Empire. And I met a man who had been is a priest, who had been banished and defrocked and put into the work in the subway system of Prague because he had been seditious and kept freedom alive in the hearts of millions of Czechs. When the Velvet Revolution started, people got on the streets, came out in the streets, and they shouted, Václav Mali, Mali, Václav Mali, Mali. And Father Mali came up out of the subway system and led that peaceful revolution, and the communists fled as he conducted Mass in the center of the square. Well, when I went there in 1990, he was the only person I really cared about meeting, and I finally got a chance to be with him. Handsome guy. Face could have been chiseled out by Michelangelo. And after about a 45-minute wonderful conversation, his English was perfect, I said to him, Father, before I left, I said, Father, you're a hero to many of us in the West. And he said, no, Chuck, you don't understand. A hero is someone who does something he doesn't have to do. I was just doing my duty. There's a book out, and I recommend it to all of you. It's called Joker 1. It is written by a man by the name of Donovan Campbell, who graduated from Princeton about 10, 12 years ago, now at the Pepsi-Cola Company. And he was a platoon commander in Iraq, 3 tours. He wrote Joker 1, which talked about the dynamics of an infantry platoon, which I had experienced in my life. So I could identify with everything on the pages, except I didn't get shot at the way he did. But he has a telling line in that book, and it's a telling line for those of us who are Christians, because it's what we ought to be emulating, the best of the Marine Corps. He said what held those men together in combat, which kept them so tight, was one thing: love. A real love for one another as brothers. And I think about that in the church, and I don't know that I've ever experienced quite that same feeling in the church. The Marines have a lot we can teach to the church, a lot we can teach to the culture. I learned what it is to have character, because you've got to give your word to somebody and keep it, because your life depends on it. You've got to trust the person next to you, because your life depends on that. That's what builds that bond. And this society right now is in such desperate need of character. This society is having a crisis, not of finance or commerce with the Great Recession. It's a crisis of character, because people made wrong moral decisions at every level. And if there's any influence we can have as Christians, or as former Marines, or as conservatives, any area of life that we need to impact, it is restoring character and courage of people to speak the truth in a society which has turned its back on truth and on God.
As I've gotten older and become an old Marine, I've come to appreciate and understand just how ironical life really is. Because tonight, while we are in this grand Ritz-Carlton hotel, and it is a wonderful place, 20,000 U.S. Marines and their corpsmen, their docs, their chaplains are on the ground in southern Afghanistan in the Helmand province. They've spread out, and tonight, while we gather here, they're in a fight for their life in a town called Marja. And ironically, that is the exact same area where the 9/11 attackers completed their final training prior to coming to the United States to attack our great country. Last Saturday morning in the Washington Post. Front page story. Showed a Marine in there, and they're tired. They hadn't eaten anything hot in 4 days. They hadn't slept in 4 days. They didn't go in with sleeping bags and things because they had to carry everything in. They got heliborned in, and they had to live with what they had on the backs of their packs for 4 or 5 days. And I guarantee you, they brought ammunition, and they brought water, and they brought their communications gear. And they brought a poncho liner. It was 20 degrees, freezing. Marines just trying to cuddle up, just trying to stay warm, and but happy. So you ask, where do we get men like this? Where do we get Marines like this in 2010? How does that happen? Well, I'll tell you, yesterday at Parris Island, South Carolina, and the Marine Corps Recruit Depot in San Diego, 927 young men and women graduated in their 12th week from boot camp and were called Marines. So at the end of the day, when I get asked the question by the veterans, do we still make them like we used to? I'm happy to report to you tonight, the Marine Corps is in great shape, and we still make them like we used to.